The first thing he noticed was the smell. Sharp smoke burned his nose, curling from the incense that priests carried in golden bowls. Mixed with it was the metallic tang of blood, sweet and bitter at the same time. His stomach twisted. He wanted to turn away, but he could not. His bare feet pressed against the cold marble floor. He was 13, maybe 14. His small body shivered, not just from the chill, but from the fear that crept up his spine. Torches flickered along the tall walls of the temple, throwing long shadows that danced like restless spirits. The walls were carved with faces of gods and emperors whose eyes seemed alive. They watched him, judging. The boy swallowed hard. His mouth was dry, yet the air was thick with the scent of oil, sweat, and incense. Every breath felt heavy, as though the room itself weighed him down. Outside, the city roared. Music, drums, and the cries of the crowd rolled through the streets. The festival had begun, a celebration of the gods, of the empire, of power. But inside, the temple was different. Here there was silence, broken only by low chants. The priests' voices rose and fell, a hypnotic rhythm that made the boy's heart beat faster. He stood near the altar, wearing only a thin linen cloth. Golden threads stitched into it caught the torchlight, glimmering like fire. His arms felt small and weak, though the high priest told him he was strong, chosen for honor, chosen for a night that would decide the fate of the empire, or so they said. The high priest moved closer. He was tall, draped in purple and gold, and his face was painted with black lines that made his eyes look like burning coals. He leaned down so the boy could hear his voice over the chanting. Tonight you are God. What happens here is not sin. It is the most sacred act that keeps empire alive. The word slammed into the boy like a hammer. He wanted to ask what it meant. His lips trembled, but no sound came. Instead, he nodded, pretending he understood. He wanted to be brave. He wanted to be worthy, and yet a shiver of fear ran through him. Around him, priests arranged strange objects on the altar, golden knives, bowls of oil, tiny carved figures, and jars of herbs whose scent made his head spin. He watched as oil dripped from the priest's fingers onto the altar, glimmering in the torchlight. The liquid smelled sweet, almost like honey, but bitter underneath. He thought of the stories the elders whispered in the market, stories of empires conquering lands, burning cities, leaving nothing behind. Carthage had fallen, men, women, children, all destroyed in a single campaign. The streets of that city had run red with blood, and yet the empire celebrated as if nothing had happened. Julius Caesar himself had boasted of the Helvetii, entire tribes annihilated, villages wiped from the map. And the Eberron tribe? They had been hunted, even after resistance ended. Only a fraction survived. The boy's eyes widened. He imagined the smoke rising from distant cities, the screams, the fire. A knot of fear and awe tightened in his chest. Was this what the priest meant by sacred? Was power always soaked in blood? The high priest circled him, slow and deliberate, as if savoring each moment. His eyes burned with something the boy could not name. Respect? Hunger? Madness? He could not tell. Do you feel it? The priest asked. Do you feel the power? The boy nodded again, though his stomach turned. He could feel the weight of everyone who had come before him, the rituals, the festivals, the conquests. He could feel the empire pressing down like an invisible hand on his small shoulders. He thought of the soldiers, too. Strong men who marched for years, crossing mountains and rivers, killing without mercy. He saw them in his mind, disciplined, cold, relentless. Carthage, the Helvetii, the Eberron, names of cities and tribes, now only whispers in the wind, all gone. All sacrificed for what the empire called progress. The torches flickered again, and the shadows seemed to move closer. The chanting grew louder, almost like a heartbeat. The boy's lips parted, and he breathed quickly, trying to steady himself. His hands trembled. He wanted to run, but the walls were lined with priests, their eyes fixed on him. There was nowhere to go. Golden bowls of oil were passed around. The scent of herbs and incense burned in his throat. His mind swirled with fear, pride, and confusion. He tried to imagine himself as a god, as the priest had said. But all he felt was small. So small, yet, despite the fear, there was a strange pull, a curiosity. What happened in the sealed chamber? No one ever spoke openly about it. Not in the streets, not in the markets. Only whispers, only the chosen knew. Only those who stood where he stood now, and he was here. Bare, trembling golden threads catching the torchlight, standing at the center of power. He was about to witness what no one else would see. The priest leaned close again, whispering words the boy barely understood. The golden liquid dripped from his hands, and the boy felt it warm against his skin. He shivered. His heart raced. He wanted to scream, but the voice inside his head told him to stay quiet, to obey, to become the god he was told he was meant to be. Outside, the festival roared on, but here in the temple, time seemed to stretch. Moments became hours. Every breath was heavy. Every step, every glance, every whisper mattered. And then the boy realized the truth. This was bigger than him, bigger than fear, bigger than honor. It was about history itself, about empires built on conquest, destruction, and ritual, about the cost of power, about the blood of countless innocents, about the system that made the world obey. But before I tell you exactly what happened in that sealed chamber, I need to show you the system that made it all possible. Before the boy could even imagine what waited in the sealed chamber, he had to understand the system that allowed it all. The system that made empires rise, the system that turned ordinary men into killers, the system that convinced children that fear was honor. Let me tell you about it. The empire believed in order, absolute order. Every citizen, every soldier, every priest had a place. And at the top were the elites, priests, generals, rulers, men and women who were above ordinary human rules. They could decide life and death with a word. And they did, without hesitation. Without remorse, they said, "We are chosen. We serve the gods. What we do is sacred," and the people believed it. Or they obeyed it. Fear was a powerful teacher. The system worked like a machine. Every law, every festival, every ritual had a purpose: to keep power concentrated in the hands of a few. Soldiers conquered lands, burned cities, and killed whole populations. Families disappeared overnight. Villages erased, all in the name of the empire. The boy remembered the stories. Carthage in flames, men and women thrown into pits. Caesar's own writings boasting of the Helvetii, where only a fraction survived. The relentless pursuit of the Eberron tribe. Every conquest was proof that the system worked. Every massacre was celebrated in secret by the elites. The priests told him that those chosen for the rituals were special. They were sacred vessels. They were not ordinary children. And the elites, they were untouchable. A high-ranking general could burn a village and still be welcomed in the palace with golden cups and feasts. A ruler could order death and still claim the favor of the gods. They called it divine duty. But here's the shocking truth. The system did not care for morality. It did not see pain. It only saw efficiency. Every act, every ritual, every conquest had a purpose. Let me give you an example. When Carthage fell, the Romans did not just win. They destroyed. Men, women, children, gone. The city was set on fire. Survivors were enslaved. The Romans documented it. They took pride in it. They wrote about it like it was a victory in a game. They laughed about the precision of their destruction. Imagine that. Whole populations wiped out, and the system justified it as law, as order, as divine will. The same system applied everywhere. Julius Caesar, proud of his campaigns, described the Helvetii in detail. Every village taken, every man killed, every woman and child enslaved. He wrote it down as a record of success. Even when resistance had ended, the army hunted the remaining Eberron tribe. They did not stop. They did not hesitate. That is the kind of power the system allowed. That is how elites stayed untouchable. It was terrifying, and yet it was also invisible to most. The people outside the palace or the temple could see soldiers and festivals. They could see roads and law courts. The empire gave the illusion of civilization. Roads, aqueducts, legal systems, all real, all amazing. But underneath, the system was built on blood. Systematic blood. A machinery of death perfected over decades, only rivaled centuries later. And the boy realized something. This system was not chaotic. It was organized, methodical, precise. Every festival, every ritual, every conquest fit into it. The rituals in the temple were not random. They were a piece of the same machine that destroyed Carthage, that crushed the Helvety, that hunted the Eberron. Power demanded it. History demanded it. The gods, the priests said, demanded it. You might think this is too much to believe, but here is proof. Writings, records, even the whispers in the streets. Caesar's letters spoke of pride and slaughter. Temple records spoke of offerings made to gods with the blood of the chosen. Everything lined up. Nothing was accidental. The system ensured it. The elites were not punished for cruelty. They were rewarded. Soldiers who carried out massacres gained rank. Priests who oversaw sacred rituals gained influence. Wealth, power, and fear all intertwined. Ordinary people suffered. Children were trained for sacrifice. Cities were burned. Entire tribes vanished. But the system kept the empire strong. And that was all that mattered. Even the boy began to understand it. He could feel the logic as cold and sharp as a blade. The system explained why the temple was golden, why the priests smiled, why the festival outside was so joyous, while the truth inside was horrifying. The system made it all possible. And the most shocking part? Everyone involved believed it was necessary. Even the children, even the victims, even the soldiers who hunted and killed without mercy. The system convinced them, or it forced them. Obedience was survival. Fear was survival. And power. Power was sacred. It was a system built for one purpose, to preserve the elite, to preserve the empire, to turn ordinary humans into instruments of control and death. If your mind is spinning right now, good. It should. History is full of stories we are never taught in school. Stories hidden behind roads, aqueducts, and laws. But when you see it, you cannot unsee it. The machinery of power is terrifyingly precise. The rituals, the killings, the festivals, all connected. All designed to strengthen the elite. And here is where you need to pay attention. The ritual the boy faced in that golden chamber, it was a product of the same system. A system that allowed massacres in distant lands. A system that allowed rulers and priests to see themselves as gods. A system that justified murder as sacred duty. Now you know why the boy shivered, why his hands trembled, why he felt both fear and awe at the same time. He was at the center of a machine older than the empire itself. A machine that had destroyed Carthage, that had wiped out the Helvety, that had hunted the Eberron tribe. This is the system that made history terrifying. The system that made elites untouchable. The system that made a 13-year-old boy stand naked in a golden chamber, waiting for a sacred act he did not fully understand. Subscribe now. This will change how you see history. Comment what you know. Watch till the end for real names and proof, because before I tell you what happened inside that chamber, you need to see what the human cost of this system really was. Who was chosen, how they were trained, how they were prepared for what no child should ever face. The boy could not yet imagine what lay ahead. But the truth was simple. In the empire, nothing came without preparation. Nothing was left to chance. Every chosen child followed a path carefully designed by the system, and that path was brutal. Let me tell you how it worked. First, there was the selection. Not every child was chosen. Only those who stood out, tall, agile, clever, obedient, or sometimes simply lucky, were offered to the priests or rulers. Some were taken from their families without warning. Their parents told it was an honor. You are blessed, the priests would say, but the child could feel the fear behind the words. The child could feel that life as they knew it was gone. Once chosen, the training began. It was relentless. Days stretched into nights, filled with exercises designed to shape body, mind, and soul. They learned to move like dancers, graceful and controlled, even when exhaustion clawed at their muscles. They learned the power of touch, the scent of herbs, the effect of oils on the skin, and the influence of music and chant over the mind. They were trained to enter trances, to feel the divine, to obey without question. Fear was constant. Not only fear of punishment, but fear of failing the gods, failing the empire, failing themselves. Every mistake was a lesson in pain. Every hesitation was a test. The children learned that life and honor were inseparable and fragile. Puberty marked the most dangerous stage. The initiation, the moment when training became reality. Priests prepared elaborate rituals with oils, herbs, and chants. Children, now adolescents, were given substances to heighten sensations, to blur the lines between fear and ecstasy. Their bodies, once soft and vulnerable, became instruments of devotion. The boy remembered whispers of this stage, words that made him shiver even now. The union with the divine, the act that preserves the empire. No one spoke it plainly, but everyone knew. It was the sacred act, the same act that tied the elite to their power. Every child faced it, and every child feared it. Honor awaited those who completed it. Those who passed initiation gained respect and prestige. Their names were remembered. They were welcomed into the inner circle, rubbing shoulders with priests, rulers, and generals. Power flowed through them. They became part of the system, but the system was not kind forever. Life followed a cruel path, honor then peak, then decline, and finally punishment. Those who failed, those who faltered, those who betrayed the sacred laws, they suffered. Often, quietly, but always completely. The boy could feel it even now in the Golden Temple. The fear of what awaited him, the weight of expectation, the knowledge that the elite were untouchable and yet merciless. It was a lesson in obedience, in survival, in the true cost of power. The system trained the body. Yes, it trained the mind. But it also trained the heart. The children learned to hide emotions, to smile when terrified, to show devotion when shivering inside. They learned that survival depended not on strength alone, but on mastering fear. On mastering themselves. Some children never survived the training. Some broke under the pressure, their minds and bodies failing them. Others succeeded but were forever haunted by what they had endured. And those who reached the inner circle, they carried the memory of every terrified glance, every whispered scream, every hand trembling in oil and herbs. This is how the system made gods out of children, not by magic but by control, by fear, by ritual, by shaping them into instruments of devotion and obedience. Imagine the boy standing in the temple, remembering the stories of Carthage, the Helvetii, the Eberron tribe. He understood now that the same fear, the same discipline applied to him, that his body and mind would be shaped, tested, and finally used to uphold the same system that had allowed empires to rise and entire peoples to fall. The priests did not hesitate. They were calm, precise, and sometimes terrifying in their devotion. Their faces were impassive, but their eyes shone with knowledge, with experience, with the satisfaction of watching the system work. They had trained hundreds, perhaps thousands. They had seen children scream, cry, pray, and obey. And each one, when properly guided, became part of the machinery. And the boy understood the stakes. Failure was not just personal. It was shame. It was the loss of honor. It was the collapse of what the priests called sacred trust. And yet, even success came at a cost. Memories of fear and pain lingered. Every child carried it like a shadow. And later, when they reached power, that shadow guided them, sometimes wisely, sometimes cruelly, always unforgettably. So the system did not just train bodies. It trained history itself. Every child, every ritual, every act of fear or devotion fed into the empire. The elite were not just rulers, they were survivors of the system. They were products of blood, fear, devotion, and ritual, and in that they held power over others. The boy shivered as he thought of the initiation. He knew it would come. He knew the ritual would demand everything from him. And yet, even in fear, there was awe. He felt the pull of the gods, the pull of the empire, the pull of history itself. He was small. He was frightened. He was uncertain. And yet, he was chosen. The cost was clear. The price of honor, power, and survival was fear, obedience, and loss of innocence. But the system did not care. It never had. It only cared that it worked, that the empire survived, that the elite remained untouchable, that the machine of history continued to grind forward, crushing all who stood in its way. And now the boy understood what it meant to be part of that machine. To feel fear, to feel honor, to feel the weight of generations of children, priests, soldiers, and rulers, all shaped by the same system. To carry the knowledge that every act, every ritual, every choice fed into something far larger than himself. The initiation awaited him. The chamber awaited him. And the system, precise and relentless, would not fail. By the time the boy reached the temple, he already understood the system. He knew fear, training, and obedience. But he had not yet seen the elites in action. He had heard whispers, but nothing prepared him for the sight. The festival outside was alive with music, dancing, and laughter. People celebrated openly, throwing coins into the streets, praising the gods, singing songs that echoed across the city. The elite, however, had a secret. Behind closed doors, beyond the glittering streets and joyous cries, they conducted ceremonies that were hidden from everyone else. Inside the palace, a hall stretched wide with golden pillars, mirrors, and oil-slicked floors. Priests and rulers moved among one another, smiling, laughing, and whispering commands. They were dressed in fine robes, jewels glinting like fire, and crowns that seemed to hold the weight of the sun. They were untouchable, above all human rules, above fear itself. The boy watched as the high priest performed the first ritual. His voice rose, chanting words that filled the hall with power. The elite knelt, bowed, or simply observed, eyes gleaming with satisfaction. They were here not as humans, but as gods observing the sacred work of devotion. "This is our duty," one ruler said to another, almost casually. "It is divine, it is necessary, and it keeps our empire alive." Their voices were calm, almost detached. And yet the boy felt the tension in the room. Behind their composed expressions lay hunger, desire, and something darker. These rituals were not simply religious. They were celebrations of power, control, and domination. He saw examples, whispered in stories, and confirmed here. A general who had led legions against the Helvetii now knelt before the altar, offering incense and gold, while secretly smiling at his achievements in conquest. A priest, whose hands had dripped oil on countless children during initiation, moved among the rulers, sharing knowledge and influence with a nod or a glance. The rituals had layers. Outwardly, they were displays of piety, devotion, and order. But inwardly, they were private indulgences, secret orgies, unions of power and pleasure, carefully concealed beneath the veneer of sacred duty. The boy felt a knot tighten in his stomach as he realized that fear and devotion were not enough. Power demanded participation, no matter how dark. He remembered the stories. Carthage burned, the Helvetii destroyed, the Eberron hunted, and now he saw the pattern repeated in the temple. Power, sacrifice, and ritual intertwined. The elites joined in, not as victims, but as orchestrators. They had learned the system. They commanded it, and they enjoyed it. One ruler, in particular, drew his attention. A man of middle age, tall with a sharp gaze, moved quietly among the priests. He oversaw a secret ceremony with children chosen for the night's rituals. His eyes flickered with satisfaction. Every act, every chant, every drop of oil and incense played into the empire's machinery. He was both participant and controller, a living example of the system's success. The boy shivered. He understood that these people were not monsters, at least not in the ordinary sense. They were products of the system, molded by fear, training, and rituals. They believed in their divine duty, and that belief gave them a shield against guilt, shame, or morality. They were untouchable because the system made them so. Yet, even as the boy watched, he could sense cracks. In private corners, eyes flickered with doubt. A priest hesitated before touching a child. A ruler flinched at a chant. Fear lingered even among the elites, though they masked it with composure. It was proof that even those at the top were still human, still aware of the cost of their power. The rituals continued through the night. Music, oil, incense, and chants blended into a hypnotic rhythm. The boy felt dizzy from the scent and the heat. He could hear whispers, low and urgent, as if the walls themselves were alive. And through it all, the elites moved with purpose, their expressions calm, proud, and terrifyingly composed. He thought of the festivals outside, the music and laughter, the coins tossed into the streets. No one there knew what happened in the palace halls, behind closed doors. The contrast was staggering: public joy, private indulgence, and both were part of the same system. One could not exist without the other. The boy realized that these elites had learned something the children did not yet understand. Power was not just about fear or obedience. It was about control, secrecy, and the careful weaving of appearances. They could command armies, destroy cities, and still appear divine. They could preside over rituals, enjoy pleasures hidden from the public, and maintain the illusion of sacred duty. And this illusion, he understood, was what kept the empire alive. The system demanded it. Without it, the machinery would falter. Without rituals, festivals, and ceremonies, the power of the elite would collapse. And so, they continued night after night, generation after generation, teaching children, training soldiers, and maintaining the empire through fear, devotion, and secrecy. The boy's heart pounded. He wanted to turn away, to run, to scream, but he could not. He was part of this now, part of the system, part of the cycle, and he knew that one day he too would join the ranks of the elite. One day he would participate in these rituals. One day he would be both controller and participant, shaping others as he had been shaped. The night stretched on. The chants grew louder. The torches flickered in the golden hall. And the boy, standing on the edge of fear and awe, realized a truth that would haunt him forever. The system was not broken. It was perfect, and it was unstoppable. The boy had seen fear, initiation, and rituals. He had seen the system and the elites in action. But there was another side, a side that few ever spoke of, the life of the elite when the ceremonies ended, and the public watched only the surface. Luxury surrounded them. Golden cups, fine silk robes, fragrant oils, rare spices from distant lands. Their homes smelled of incense, flowers, and the faint sharpness of blood. Servants moved silently, carrying bowls of fruit, jars of wine, and silver trays heavy with delicacies. Every detail was calculated, every comfort designed to remind them of their status, their power, their untouchable position. The boy noticed it even in the temple corridors. He saw the way the priests walked with perfect posture, every gesture deliberate. He saw the rulers reclining on couches, their skin glowing from oils, their hair combed and scented, eyes sharp, observing everything. They lived in a world separated from fear, except the fear they could control in others. Banquets were a spectacle. Large tables groaned under the weight of roasted meats, exotic fruits, and pastries sweetened with honey. Servants poured wine, their movements smooth, careful not to spill a drop. The elite ate slowly, savoring the taste and the power it represented. They exchanged whispers, plotted, and smiled at each other with a secret understanding. Their laughter was light, almost playful, but behind it lay calculation. Every word, every glance, every sip of wine was part of the game of influence. The boy had heard stories of rise and fall. A young man, once a lowly soldier, could become a priest with enough cunning and loyalty. A child who completed the sacred initiation perfectly could ascend to favor with the rulers. But the system was unforgiving. One mistake, one hesitation, one display of weakness, and the fall was swift. Some disappeared quietly, others suffered punishments whispered about in fear across the empire. And yet the allure of power was irresistible. Seduction was part of the lifestyle. The elites learned to command desire, to use it as a tool. The boy saw it in the way priests looked at each other, the way rulers smiled at those who served them, the way subtle touches could shift allegiance and loyalty. The body, mind, and heart were all instruments of power. Every act of intimacy was also an act of control. Even pleasure became a form of dominance, a way to cement influence over others. The boy shivered. He understood now that the rituals he feared so much were only a small part of the life of the elite. The true power was in every detail, in appearances, in obedience, in control of desire, in mastery of fear. To survive and to thrive was to understand all of it. Even the afterlife was a part of their system. The elite believed that their deeds, their rituals, their sacrifices, even the blood they oversaw, would secure favor with the gods. They imagined palaces in the heavens, immortality, divine protection. It was not just belief. It was another layer of control, a reassurance that justified every act, every cruelty, every ritual. They were safe, untouchable, destined for glory beyond life itself. The boy's heart raced as he watched a real example unfold. A young priest who had once trembled during his own initiation now stood confidently among rulers, directing ceremonies, managing wealth, and commanding respect. His rise was swift, fueled by obedience, cunning, and devotion. But the whispers reminded everyone that the fall could be even faster. A single error, a hidden secret exposed, or a failure to please the gods or the rulers could erase everything. Luxury, power, fear, and devotion intertwined to create a lifestyle that was both alluring and terrifying. The boy realized that the rituals were only the beginning. The true mastery came in understanding human nature, the desires and fears of others, and using them to secure position, influence, and control. And yet the boy felt something stir inside him, a tiny spark of doubt. Could such a life ever be truly honorable? Could it be right to enjoy luxury built on fear, on obedience, on blood? He pushed the thought away, knowing that hesitation could be dangerous. To question the system too openly was dangerous. To question the elite was dangerous. And yet, the spark remained, flickering quietly in the back of his mind. The night continued. Torches burned low. The banquets were endless. Servants moved silently. The elites smiled, drank, whispered, and planned. The boy understood that this was not just wealth, it was control. Every detail, every ritual, every act of luxury reinforced the system. The rituals, the conquests, the fear, and the obedience all fed into the same machine. The boy shivered again, this time from awe more than fear. He saw the power of the elite, the control of history itself, the ability to shape human lives and entire empires. And he understood one more truth. Power, once earned, was seductive. It promised safety, prestige, and immortality, but it demanded everything in return. As he stood in the flickering torchlight, the boy realized the empire's machinery was more than fear or ritual. It was strategy, indulgence, obedience, and secret knowledge. Every act, every whisper, every glance contributed to a system that was unstoppable, precise, and terrifyingly efficient. The elites had learned it. They thrived in it, and one day he too would have to learn it, if he wished to survive and rise. The boy had seen rituals, training, elite festivals, and luxurious lifestyles. He had seen the system at work, the machinery of power, and the fear that kept it alive. But as the years passed, even the greatest empires showed cracks, and the boy, now older, would witness the hidden side of power, corruption, rumors, and decline. The system that built the empire also wore it down. Elites, once feared and revered, began to show weakness. Greed replaced devotion. Desire overtook discipline. Where once there was order, now whispers and secrets multiplied like shadows in the halls. The boy had seen it in small moments. A priest taking more than his share, a ruler ignoring the law for personal gain, a festival turning into indulgence rather than ritual. Corruption was everywhere. It was subtle, hidden, yet deadly. The boy remembered the stories. Generals who pocketed gold from conquered lands, priests who traded influence for favors, rulers who ignored sacred duty for personal pleasure. And worse, the public had begun to notice. Whispers traveled faster than armies. Rumors spread like wildfire through markets, streets, and homes. People questioned, feared, and sometimes resisted. But the system had survived for centuries. Could it survive this? Some figures fell faster than others. A high-ranking priest, once untouchable, was accused of misusing sacred rituals. His temples, once filled with incense and gold, became empty. His followers abandoned him quietly, too afraid to speak, too fearful to act. And still, the empire survived. But his personal power was gone. Even legends of conquest were revisited with shame. Stories of Carthage, the Helvetii, and the Eberron began to circulate with moral outrage. Historians and scribes recorded accounts of brutality, raising questions the boy had only felt in the shadows. How could such destruction be justified? How could so many lives vanish without consequence? The elite had built their empire on fear, ritual, and obedience. But history remembered differently. The boy, now more aware of human nature, saw the psychological toll on the elites. Fear of losing influence, fear of exposure, fear of rivals all gnawed at their composure. Secret plots, betrayals, and punishments became more common. Even those who had once stood at the peak of power trembled in the night. Shadows in their chambers whispered doubts, doubts that they could not erase with gold or rituals. One iconic figure embodied this decline. A ruler, once celebrated for conquest and wisdom, found himself beset by enemies, both real and imagined. Whispers of cruelty and corruption spread through the empire like poison. Soldiers and priests began to question orders. Festivals lost their luster. And the ruler, who had once stood untouchable, began to falter. His power was not gone, but it was fragile, hanging by threads woven from fear and secrecy. The boy realized something chilling. The same system that elevated the elite also trapped them. Greed, desire, corruption, these were not just mistakes, but consequences of absolute power. The more untouchable they became, the more they were watched. The more they indulged, the more enemies they made. And in the end, the very rituals and training that gave them strength also reminded them of mortality, weakness, and guilt. Rumors played a dangerous role. Even small whispers could unravel decades of control. A servant, a priest, or a child could carry a story into the streets. One whispered accusation could bring shame or death. And yet, the public fascination with scandal grew. People loved to speak of the fall of the mighty, to imagine justice for those above human laws. It was a dangerous balance. The elite needed secrecy, yet lived surrounded by curiosity and rumor. The boy watched as power and corruption intertwined. He saw rulers dismiss sacred laws for personal gain. He saw priests manipulate rituals for influence. He saw soldiers betray their commanders to climb ranks faster. And he understood. The system was perfect in theory, but human nature introduced chaos. The machinery of history ground on, but friction wore down the wheels. Even the greatest rituals and festivals could not protect the elite from decline. Their wealth, power, and control could delay consequences, but time and scrutiny were relentless. The boy understood that fear and obedience were temporary shields. Eventually, corruption, rumors, and human weakness exposed the cracks, and yet, despite decline, the system endured. The empire remained strong, the festivals continued, and the rituals persisted. The machinery had become resilient, capable of absorbing individual failures. But the memory of the fallen lingered. The boy, older now, hardened by knowledge, knew that even untouchable figures were not immune. History would judge them. Generations would remember both the power and the corruption, the rise and the fall, the fear and the indulgence. He thought of Carthage, the Helvetii, and the Eberron. The names were more than stories. They were warnings. Even the most absolute power could decay under the weight of greed, secrecy, and human desire. The system that preserved elites could not erase the mark of their actions, and those who fell left lessons written in fear, whispers, and memory. The boy shivered in the dim light. He understood that the elite's luxury, rituals, and power were fragile beneath the surface. He understood that corruption could destroy them just as quickly as ambition had built them up. And he realized that history was a living record, not of gods, not of untouchable rulers, but of humans, their choices, and the consequences that followed. The iconic figure, now old and wary, faced whispers, scrutiny, and doubt. The boy could almost hear his trembling voice in the chambers where once he had given orders with certainty. Time had revealed the fragility behind power, and yet the empire endured, reminding the boy that systems could survive even when humans faltered. Corruption, rumors, decline. These were as much a part of the system as initiation, ritual, and conquest. They showed the boy that power demanded vigilance, cunning, and sometimes ruthlessness. It also reminded him that no one, not even the mighty, was invincible. The boy thought of the chamber, the rituals, the fear, the awe. He understood that the system had one final lesson. Power is fleeting. Even gods of the temple fall. Even rulers admired by the masses are remembered for their failings. And even the machinery of history must contend with human weakness. The boy, now older, stood once more in the golden chamber. The flickering torchlight cast long shadows across the walls, shadows that seemed alive, moving like memories of centuries past. He remembered the first time he had entered, trembling, bare, and unsure of his place. He remembered fear, awe, confusion, and a strange flicker of pride. All of it had led him here. He could smell the incense again, thick and heavy, mixed with the sweet, sharp scent of oil. The air was still, as if the temple itself waited for him to remember. He closed his eyes and saw flashes of history, Carthage burning, the Helvetii falling, the Eberron hunted. He felt the echo of centuries of rituals, ceremonies, and festivals, each one designed to strengthen the empire and the elite who ruled it. And now he understood. He remembered the high priest, eyes blazing with authority, whispering, "Tonight you are God. What happens here is not sin. It is the most sacred act that keeps empire alive." He shivered, not from fear this time, but from knowledge. Knowledge of the system, the rituals, the fear, the devotion, the luxury, and the corruption. He understood the machinery of power, how it elevated children, trained them, seduced them, and bound them to obedience. He understood how elites lived in luxury, commanded desire, indulged in pleasure, and yet always faced the fragility of their own power. And he understood the human cost. The children, the adolescents, the slaves, the conquered peoples, they had all been parts of the system. Their fear, pain, and obedience fed the machine. Entire tribes had been erased. Cities had burned. Histories had been rewritten, and still the system endured. The boy, now a man, felt the weight of it pressing on his chest. His heart pounded with the memories of initiation, the training, and the ceremonies. He remembered the trembling hands of those who had come before him, and the proud, calculated faces of the elites who had guided them. He remembered the whispers, the rumors, the corruption, and the fall of those once untouchable. He realized a truth that was both simple and terrifying. This is how elite corruption works. Power, fear, obedience, and indulgence are a cycle. They elevate the few while controlling the many. They justify cruelty as sacred duty. They protect themselves from morality, scrutiny, and consequence until the cracks begin to show. And yet, despite all the corruption, the empire endured. The festivals continued. The rituals persisted. The elites adapted. They found new children, trained new disciples, and maintained their hold over fear and devotion. History marched forward, indifferent to morality, indifferent to lives lost. The system had learned to survive, even as humans faltered. The man took a deep breath, feeling the air thick with incense and memory. He remembered standing there, years ago, wondering if he could survive, if he could be worthy, if he could become part of the divine machinery. And now he understood that survival was never the same as innocence. To survive meant learning the rules, obeying them, and sometimes participating in acts that weighed on the soul. He thought of the conquered, Carthage, Helvetii, Eberron. The names burned in his mind, reminders that history is not just written by the victors, it is shaped by the machinery of power. Every act of the elite, every ritual, every festival of luxury had real consequences. The blood of the many sustained the privilege of the few. And now he had a choice. He could become like them, a part of the elite machinery, or he could carry the knowledge, the memories, and the responsibility to tell the truth. To remember what had happened in that sealed chamber. To remember the children, the victims, the sacrifices. The weight of history pressed on him. His hands trembled just as they had when he was 13. His heart pounded. But this time it was not fear of the ritual. It was fear of forgetting. Fear that the system would continue unchecked if no one remembered, if no one spoke. And so he made a vow, not of power, not of wealth, not of indulgence, but of truth. He would remember. He would tell the story. He would show the system for what it was, and he would challenge others to see it too, because this is the lesson of the Golden Chamber. This is the truth behind the festivals, the rituals, the elites, the luxury, and the corruption. Power protects itself, history remembers, and the cost is always human. Fear, obedience, indulgence, and ambition are a cycle that repeats through the ages, and if we do not watch carefully, it will repeat again. Remember the boy trembling in that chamber. Remember the smell of incense, oil, and blood. Remember the torchlight, the chants, the gold, the fear, and the awe. Remember the system that built empires and the human cost it demanded, and then ask yourself, what would you do if you stood there? Would you obey? Would you question? Would you become part of the cycle, or would you remember, tell, and resist? History is watching. So are the stories. And so should we. Comment victims or believers. Subscribe, share, click the next video.